Welcome to Facing Inward, where patient experiences become shared wisdom. This podcast is a space for candid conversations with patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals who believe that every story holds the power to heal, educate, and inspire change. Whether you're navigating your own health journey or seeking to better understand the human side of healthcare, you belong here. And now your host, Melissa Carter.
Eleanor Roosevelt said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You must do the thing you think you cannot do." That, of course, can apply to so many medical patients who face a terrible and terrifying diagnosis. And one man is even taking that into leadership in the arena he once dreaded being a part of. I'm talking about Bryon Daily, who is the National Community Outreach Manager at Blood Cancer United, formerly the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Bryon, one thing I must confess, and it is, with a little bit of embarrassment, I didn't realize that Blood Cancer United used to be the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So my apologies for not realizing the name change. So could you explain that maybe for people who remember the old name?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason behind the name change is essentially to address those patients and families who have been impacted by, different variations of cancer. Everyone's pretty much familiar with leukemia and lymphoma, mostly because of the name. But there is myeloma, that's another form of blood cancer. And there's probably 100 plus derivatives of each of these three main types of cancers. So we wanted to be very inclusive. And by changing the name, I think we were able to accomplish that.
Well, and I think that that is a wonderful thing to be able to be inclusive, because I know that from a patient's perspective, the first thing that they don't feel is included, right, when it comes
That
to
is.
whatever's going on with them. And I'm sure it has to be overwhelming sometimes for an organization to represent one portion of the population, and then the other portions of the population like, hey, don't forget about me. But I think that it's important for people to understand when it comes to cancer, we sometimes we hear that word, and it's this broad umbrella, and we don't realize that we do realize it comes in different forms, but there's separate challenges involved depending on where it shows up. So do you find that people, until they get diagnosed, probably didn't have any awareness of
Oh,
how much the blood is affected by
yeah. I
cancer?
mean, that's the operative word, awareness. And for most people who have never had cancer or blood cancer, the first time they hear that they've been diagnosed is probably the first time they're going to learn about the disease. So, there's a learning curve, as well as some of the other challenges that come through when you experience that journey. The reason we've decided to change the name is because we wanted to make sure that people knew that we are the go-to experts in blood cancer.
I have to admit, I'm a kidney transplant recipient, and it's one of the reasons that I wanted to start the podcast and talk about patients' experiences from a variety of ailments, for a lack of a better term. I did not know what the kidney did until my kidneys start failing. So I was diagnosed in my 20s, and I will confess the only thing that I knew about a kidney was like the kidney punch in boxing. So
Right.
it's quite adorable, I think. First of all, we're all not seeking out to be medical patient or medical students, rather. Some of us may have paid more attention in biology than others, but it is very important to understand. I've tried to teach my son, who is 11 now, how important the body is as a machine, as a holistic machine, and to be aware of when the body's trying to talk to you. So that's what, when it came to
Right.
just hunger, or when he has an upset stomach or whatever it is. I've
Sure.
tried to reinforce that because, Bryon, talk about maybe some of the ways that people come to realize that something is wrong with them when it comes to their blood, because your body is always trying to tell you if something's amiss.
Yeah, yeah. And to go back to your becoming aware
Confession?
of, your confession about becoming aware of kidney failure. You know, Similar to you, I'm a patient. I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma back in 2018, and prior to that, I had never heard of myeloma, nor did I know anything about the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, currently the Blood Cancer United. So when I was introduced, I had an opportunity to kind of really lean in and learn a lot more about the disease. But you were asking about what are some of the symptoms maybe that
Yeah.
that you would realize that you may have a problem, not necessarily that you can identify what that problem is. But for me, it was a couple of things. One was I was very diligent about going to see my doctor on an annual basis. So my primary care physician was following some trends in my lab work. Specifically, my blood and urine samples were yielding a lot higher levels of protein. It would elevate over the course of a few months. So fortunately for me, I had a really good primary care physician who was tracking these things. And when he noticed that there was a trend, he became concerned. He expressed that to me, suggested first, let's go take a look at a urologist and see what he thinks. In the meantime, I'm living life day to day. I go to the gym. I work out maybe at least 3 days a week. And so I was in the gym one day playing basketball. I caught the ball sort of in an awkward position and I bent my finger back. Something, you jam your finger, that happens. I've done it, many times in the past. But this particular injury, although it didn't feel like it was severe, it just wouldn't heal. It took a couple of weeks and it still looked like it did the day before. So I went to the doctor. They did an MRI. They found that it was a fracture. My primary care physician took that piece of information and said, okay, now we're looking at your elevated protein levels in your blood and urine, and now you've got a fracture from something that typically would have been a sprain. And so that's when the red flag went up in his mind and said, okay, let's have you speak to a hematologist. And then the next step after that was an oncologist, where we did the biopsy, and then they made the diagnosis from there.
The importance of doctors, right? Because I have seen, and I'll tell you this, I was walking through a hospital recently. I had a doctor's appointment, and I won't name the hospital. And the doctor was in one of the adjacent buildings to a hospital. Well, he was running late. They let me know he was running late. And I said, that's fine. I'll get some steps in, right? So I'll walk to the hospital. I'll go to the gift shop. Like I'll just walk the halls and then I'll come back. And I noticed that there was nobody was talking to each other, right? In the hallways, people were
Mhm.
not like being, hey, festive season, how you doing? And
Right.
then there was one moment that really struck me where it was, and she wasn't quite elderly, but an older woman who was in a wheelchair. She was in her street clothes. She was being wheeled to what seemed probably was a routine scan of some kind, and she was like light and she was cheery and she was talking, and the woman who was pushing her was just blank expression and giving like obligatories, uh-huh, and yeah, and that kind of thing. And I just
Mhm.
remember being very sad by that
Mhm.
as a patient, because in my experience, it's not only a lonely one, but it's also sometimes very terrifying. And
Absolutely.
you realize you're the only one going through this, and so you need a smiling face. Even if when I would go to the hospital cafeteria and there would be the smiling cook, right, who would just tell me to have a blessed day, that means
Mhm.
so much.
Sure.
Compared to someone who may be healthy and just kind of rushing through their day. Point being, I was like, are we at a point now where the medical community is so overwhelmed that they can't even muster the energy to be able to show that kindness like they may want to? Because I'm giving the benefit of the doubt. If you're in the medical community, there's a reason you want to be there and heal people. But anyway, so Bryon, your story is like, oh, well, thank goodness he had good doctors and had people who were paying attention to what's going on to get you to that diagnosis, as opposed to, unfortunately, some doctors who may not be paying attention to their patients. Do you find that with the people you work with at the Blood Cancer United, that maybe sometimes they've had bad experiences with doctors?
Sure. We have a lot of staff members who are patients and have been diagnosed with cancer, but we also interact with patients who are going through that journey as we speak. And I tell you, Melissa, it's that thing when you notice that your provider or the person who's you have immediate connection with, who's supposed to be caring for you, is indifferent. I've seen it. I was very fortunate. I had a lot of family and friends that pitched in. You really have to suit up when we go through this battle. You almost have to come out of yourself, which is hard enough when you're going through this experience, to accept the vulnerability, take whatever assistance you can get. It's all about healing, and sometimes patients aren't even aware of how to do that. They're not good self advocates. They don't have people around them that can advocate for them. That makes it that much more challenging.
It must be a wonderful community to be a part of at Blood Cancer United, where you, like you said, it's fellow patients. You speak each other's language. And that's not to fault people who have not been diagnosed with anything, certainly, because I mean that's the that's the dream, is to be healthy and never have to face these things. But when you do, you tend to like seek out someone who has some kind of empathy or understanding. And like I said, with our corporate medical environment, it's getting lost that just a smile or a kind word or a happy tone when seeing someone makes a world of difference to those who are suffering. So when you got diagnosed, what was the plan? Like, how do you treat? And you said multiple myeloma. Is that correct? What you were
Yeah,
diagnosed with?
that's correct.
Yeah.
That's right. Your oncologist will work with you by, looking at your lab work, seeing what stage you're at, and really prescribing a treatment. And you're a part of this team to select, what the best treatment is for you. Hopefully, you'll be offered an opportunity to participate in a clinical trial, which also comes with its own set of challenges. If you're not familiar with what that means, you're not being experimented on like a lot of people think. As far as treatment, when your oncologist tells you you've got, a set of options here. You've got A, you can do a standard line of treatment. B, depending on your level of severity, we're going to give you this mix of drugs, and this is how it works, and this is what it does. So you're going through a crash course lesson in how to treat your specific type of blood cancer. Even if it is multiple myeloma, that it's not doesn't mean that everyone gets treated the same way. Everyone's physiology is different. So it really depends on how you respond to these drugs that you're prescribed. The standard treatment typically for me was you get chemotherapy so they can reduce the amount of cancer cells in your body. See how you respond to that. For me, over the course of a few months, I was given what's called a bone marrow transplant. It's not a transplant in the sense that they're taking something out and putting it back in your body. There's two types of bone marrow transplants. I call it BMT. You've got allogeneic, which means that you have to find a donor who matches your blood profile and will be able to contribute cells that will be planted in your body and will grow and help you heal. Or you can donate back to yourself, sometimes, which was I was fortunate to be one of those people, and that's called autologous bone marrow transplant, or BMT. So they were able to take some blood from my body after a heavy dose of chemo, so they can wipe out all the bad cells in order to harvest the T cells. And then they took that to a lab. They harvested that and was able to build up a large quantity of T cells that they could be introduced to my body that were fresh. And those T cells, this was fascinating to me. The doctor told me that the way that works is when they re-inject you with that, or they inject you with that new product that came from your body originally, then they know exactly where to go in your body to plant themselves like a seed.
Wow.
And then replicate and grow and, do what they need to do.
Look, Bryon, I didn't even realize that with a bone marrow transplant, you could donate to yourself. I think there are plenty of people who are healthy that understand the magic of the body. But I will say, in my personal experience with my body breaking down on me, is what made me appreciate what a wonderful machine this is and how much we don't even know it can do. Like you said, with the T cells, I know with stem cells, there's probably more discoveries we'll have on
Sure.
ways that we can heal ourselves. But not to interrupt, but I am fascinated. So they give you the chemo before they take your blood, or do they zap the blood to get the T cells?
The order is that they'll take your blood first so they can extract the T cells from that. And then right before they inject you with the new product, they'll give you a really heavy dose of chemo to
Gotcha.
zap out, as much of the bad cells as possible. Basically bring you down to a zero immunity condition, which case you're susceptible to all kinds of germs. But they do it within like a 24-hour period so they can get those T cells in your body as quickly as possible and get them to start working. But in the meantime, I was pretty much out of the public domain. I had to be quarantined for about 90 days.
Yeah.
So I couldn't go out except back and forth to the hospital for treatment. No public restrooms, no grocery stores. And keep in mind, when I was diagnosed, I was fortunate that this all happened before COVID. So for those
Yes.
patients who were experiencing COVID during their diagnosis,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the level of anxiety
when I had my transplant was 23 years ago. I was fascinated by the clean rooms in the hospital. I had to be in a clean room because with the transplant, they had to bring my immunity down because of fear of rejection. And then they kind of experiment how much they can bring your system up. And then I take medication for the rest of my life to keep
Mhm.
my body from rejecting the transplanted kidney.
Mhm.
But like you said, that was way before COVID. And that's why, I tell family and friends, and I say it on this podcast a lot, it's the debate of the healthy, right? If you're debating whether to get your vaccine, or you're debating whether to wear a mask, or you're debating at the time whether to go out or not, it's like, well, you're blessed to be able to have the debate. It's not a debate for me. I have no option, right?
Yeah,
I was in the house a year longer than everybody else because I didn't trust people.
sure.
Because if you're fighting on whether to get a shot, then I can't trust you with my health because you obviously don't understand how all this works. And so when they have to put your immunity that far down, then they do protect you. You are you are isolated, and
Sure.
and it's amazing how you have to protect yourself from things you can't even see.
Yeah, it's a life or death decision you make every day.
Yeah, exactly. When you had your T cells brought back in, how fast, you said they seed themselves and they start going to work immediately. What was the time frame like for that healing process?
That's a good question. I really couldn't tell you because it wasn't a noticeable difference. It had nothing to really compare it to, except for
Gotcha.
I knew that I was getting better, and they were following, the lab results. That was really the indicator to say that okay, the T cells are working. The conversations I would have with my oncologist, I'd say after about 90 days, I felt confident that I can go out there, still continue to mask up, get my COVID shots because that we were now in the midst of COVID, and really just pay close attention to exposure to anything that may compromise my immune system.
Right. You had mentioned earlier about your support system. In my case, I had fortunately people around me that were very sensitive to what they were exposing themselves to be around me because I had a 5-year-old son when COVID started.
Mm.
So,
Yeah,
unfortunately, his school allowed him to learn from home because of me, and they gave options to there was a whole classroom filled with children remotely who were part of families who they had to be careful, right? And that's so important again because as a patient, not only are you depending on your family members, you're depending on your doctors, like it puts you in a position of having to have complete trust in other people. And if
yeah,
you're someone that has a problem with that, you have to really learn quickly to let go of any control. You have to be part of a community, right?
yeah. And I tell you, Melissa, you and I are both very fortunate that we have people in our lives that are willing to make that sacrifice and be our caregivers.
Yeah,
But there's a lot of folks out there that they don't have that support system.
that's right.
That's one of the things that drives me and our staff here at Blood Cancer United. Some of us have been through the journey. Even the ones who have not are very empathetic. We understand that all patients need care, regardless of where they come from, who they are, or how they identify. When you're vulnerable, it's very difficult to achieve a level of positivity.
Yeah.
And that's important when you're trying to heal, being positive and trying to reduce your stress level. So
And that's why I mentioned Brian earlier about watching the woman being wheeled by the hospital staff member.
yeah,
It's the for those who may again, you don't have to go through something in order to support the cause. I certainly don't think that, but I do think that there may be some things you may not realize are important, like the kindness.
yeah,
There was one person who had asked me, they had a friend who was going through, I think it was kidney failure, and they were asking, what is something that I can do for them and be a good friend? And I said, don't talk about their bodies. Don't ask them how they feel.
right,
Don't
right,
15,000 people are asking them how they feel. They want that one person to come to them and say, "Oh my gosh, I got to tell you this story having nothing to do with health." You
right.
know,
Yeah,
you want somebody to treat you normally just because you're sick. all of a sudden people tend to get nervous or not know what
Sure,
to do.
sure.
And I know their intention is good, but like you said, I mean, it could be as simple as, "Let me tell you about the soap opera today," and, "Oh my gosh, you've gotta watch it. We gotta watch this together," and and distract their mind. So, Brian, I wanna go back just for a second because, to talk about, Blood Cancer, United and how you got there, because how rewarding it must be to be able to have this knowledge and this experience and now being able to help other patients like yourself.
Yeah, I can't even tell you how grateful I am to be affiliated with this organization. It's really a purpose-driven mission for me. I've had jobs in the past. This is not a job. This is something that I literally volunteered to do after becoming well enough after treatment. But my first exposure to the organization was as a patient. My oncologist office had a patient liaison. They had a bunch of resources to give the patients, some booklets and pamphlets, websites, and such, so that the patients and their families didn't have to go on the internet and Google stuff,
Right.
right?
Oh,
So,
don't do that.
yeah, don't do that. And so I got this packet of information from LLS, and I read through it. I was very impressed, just from reading the material. And I felt like they knew they were the go-to resource if I had any questions about cancer. After becoming well enough, as I mentioned, I not only took advantage of some of the benefits because they did have parking reimbursement for me. And so parking, depending on where you're located, may be $10, $15 a day. All that stuff adds up. If
Absolutely.
you're going every day for 30, 60, 90 days, you're spending hundreds of dollars on just parking.
Right.
So they were able to provide some subsidies to offset that. I thought that was great.
Again, it's the thing that people don't think about.
Right.
It's the gas to get there. If you don't
Yeah.
feel well, the
Right.
the motivation and the energy to make it, and then
Sure.
the parking, and then if you're going in there to eat, you might, if it's a facility that has a cafeteria.
Yeah, and you don't want to burden people who are pitching in and helping out and telling them they got to pay to park,
Right.
in addition to the gas that they've already used. So that was impressive. And when I decided to volunteer, I was familiar with the patient and community outreach manager in my area, and it was a natural transition for me to go out there and do the work and be a servant leader. I met other servant leaders and made me even more impressed because of the level of their commitment. When I was offered the opportunity to join the staff, the person who recommended me was my predecessor for the role that I'm currently in. I guess that made it easy for them to decide this is a person. I had myeloma, so I'm a blood cancer patient. I've been exposed to how to do the work at the grassroots level and do it with passion. And so it was a win-win, for both me and them.
Brian, I could talk to you all day about this because, again, when you talk with someone who's been through a life threatening circumstance, the perspective is different. The philosophy of life can be different. I shouldn't say it is with everybody, but I think that I believe being sick is an opportunity to really appreciate life more and to
No doubt.
live your life differently. And so, two last questions. One, how can people get involved with Blood Cancer United? And then the second one is, and I'll remind you, I just want to give you the forewarning that it's basically, what do you want people, and especially the medical community, to do better or know, or how do you want them to change how they handle patients?
Well, let me just say this about the medical community. You've got some fantastic medical providers and nurses, doctors who we could not heal without their expertise and skill and empathy. You're always going to have, some bad seeds out there, and for whatever reason, they may have gotten into the wrong occupation, or maybe they're burnt out. You don't know what their story is. And as a patient, it's difficult to give grace to people who, they see you're sick and they're going through that challenge. But you were right. When you're going through this type of illness or any kind of illness, you start to think differently, right?
Yeah.
You start, things become more existential when you're looking at, life and what is our purpose. And these things go through your mind. On top of that, your mind is full of chemo drugs, so you're going through things you wouldn't even normally think of. They come into your mind, and it's an interesting journey. I would say if everyone could go through that without the consequences of possibly passing away, that may be an exercise for everyone to actually get right. For
Yeah.
lack of a better term.
And now, if someone wants to get involved with Blood Cancer United, or if they're a patient and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was a resource for me," what's the best way for them to reach out?
Best way is to go to the website. We've got a really comprehensive website. We just did an update along with the rebranding. So things are still evolving. We're still adding more resources to that site. But if you would go to bloodcancerunited.org, you can navigate and find anything you want, whether it's volunteer opportunities, employment. We have a nutrition staff. They're clinically trained nutrition experts that will offer free consultation to anyone with cancer, not just blood cancer. So that's a little known resource that we're trying to promote. We do research. We actually do scholarships. We do events to promote those who have passed, those who are in the fight, at the grassroots levels that are doing the work, people who donate. So we've got a really full service organization to make sure that patients and families are given the best when they're going through this journey.
Well, that's amazing, and I just made a note about the nutritionist on site. That's for anyone, that has cancer, because that that is something else. I was assigned a nutritionist when I got sick, and I was like, I didn't even pay much attention, right,
Yeah,
to what I was putting in my body or how that all works together.
right.
And again, things that we probably should incorporate in our school curriculum, but not
Yep,
yet.
yep.
Bryon Daily, thank you so much. I'm glad you're still here, and thank you for the work you
Likewise.
do.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Facing Inward is an extension of my book, Facing Inward, available anywhere books are sold. This podcast is a production of Wanging Dude Publishing, all rights reserved. Thanks for listening.